I've been thinking very recently, and before that, maybe subliminally, um, about asking myself all the time the old cliche that come up, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, what would Jesus do?
Right.
I try to put my mindset in that place. What would Jesus do when it comes to our issues that we have and resisting? Um, it is my hope that I get closer and closer to what Jesus would do when we have to deal with these sorts of things. But I want to go back to many people that know me is that I have a very, very, very fond affinity to ministering to young people. A few months ago, one of my sermons, I did research on and came up with some statistics, and not only for millennials, but also for young people that leave the church. And the most startling statistic to me, and you probably would see this in any church or anywhere, but teenagers, there's a rate of 75 to 90% of teenagers that actually leave the church during their teen years and don't come back.
Right.
And that's something we are battling against. So when we're thinking about change, when the powers that be think about changing a person into a new position or a new appointment, we need to think about where they're going and what do they have, what strengths do they have? Can they minister to this particular aspect where we're losing so many of our young people? And even if we have people, young people that are taking part, we've lost some of them. They're taking part, but they're already gone. I can tell you, I know that for myself. So that's one of the areas that I think we need to focus on when we're looking at the change and how we train people, how we train our pastors. We need to look at that because like Major Ashcraft said, it'll just end up with people with white hair.
Can I object to the question, Isaiah?
Okay, yeah.
So I know, and I want to say how honored I am to be here. Thank you for bringing me. As I know I'm the catalyst from the outside, so I really am honored to be invited into this conversation. I just need to point out that your question is land-based. It's territorial. The whole thing about defending territory is land-based, and as we become in a liquid, fluid culture, if we embrace the ship, the seafaring way, it changes that conversation. You are defensive when it is injurious to yourself or the integrity of your ship.
Right.
But as far as being defensive of a territory, the entire premise of your question, I know that's why I was brought in, is I'm not trying to be objectionable just for the sake of being combative, but the heart behind your question was territorial. And so it's actually a bad question in one sense, just the way it's framed.
Can I just go back, because I wasn't quite finished, but as a navigator, which is what I do, an orthopedic nurse navigator, it's my job to meet people where they are, whatever education they have about what's going to happen in this process, and then lead them through it. So what I am is a change agent. And when we change our thought process to being a change agent, you meet the person where they are and help them. And so that means whatever education they might need, whatever explanation of the why they might need, all of that has to be answered, or else they're not going to be successful in that transition. So we have to change ourselves into being change agents. And that means preparing for the change too. So if I'm not prepared as a lay leader to help my core go through a change in leadership or a change in a building or a change in a location in the same town, if I'm not ready to do that, then I can't lead that transition, because I am the one who needs to do it. Like, I'm the one.
So even like the metaphor for leadership, sometimes we think, of things in those static terms, and the metaphor for leadership being a person who's supposed to shepherd people, through the change that they're having, is probably something that can be more helpful. It can help us to have more peace of mind about, that
Right, get rid
change
of
is
that.
not something that's disruptive to.
Right. Get rid of that hierarchical thinking, because sometimes it's, what is it? The child will lead them.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? If you're not ready for whoever's going to step up to the plate to be the change agent, it isn't always going to be the Corps officer.
Yeah.
It might be a child that leads.
Right.
And it occurs to me also in thinking about the territorial thing that Bo was bringing up, when we start out and we think the different changes that can happen in a Corps, maybe there's a planned change, such as an officer change, or maybe there's an unexpected change, maybe there's a broken marriage, or maybe there's a death or something like that comes unexpectedly, and obviously that leads to change. We think of that in terms of its effects upon our community. We think of that in terms of the new reality we have to live in and the disruption, but maybe it would be healthier to think of those things in terms of these are normal parts of being a community together, and these changes, these disruptions, these crises can catalyze change for the better. They can actually help us with mission. There are occasions for mission. Right? There are occasions for us to use our relationships that we form with other people to navigate. Isn't that beautiful? We got the ocean going, thing, and even Chris's job title is a navigator.
Right.
So
Right.
those are some good metaphors and everything. A different way to think about change. Major Glasgow, I'm wondering if you're.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, with that whole metaphor, there's going to be those storms in life we're constantly dealing with. Yeah. If they affect an individual, then there's the ripple effect to the people. Right?
Yeah, they can be on the small scale that are very individual, family based, or on the community wide base. Yeah, definitely. Major Glasgow, was I reading you right? You had something to add there?
I just wanted to add that, particularly as we talk about mission and our place in the world, in society, is we have to understand this. It cannot be predicated on our own systems of belief. It has to be in a point of view where we go and meet people where they are. So I have a unique perspective. We're the new Corps that was a building built and then told to plan a Corps. So,
always the best way to do things, the Salvation Army,
build the ship, then move it to the ocean.
It goes totally against every paradigm we know. So year in, people ask us all the time, my wife and I, how did you get all these people here? How did you do this? How did you do that? And there's a context. The Salvation Army, in its uniqueness, is not a building or a place in time or a place in the community. We have to be a part of community. That means that we have to actively be outside of our doors. We have to actively engage people where they are. We have to actively see them in their living, in their habitat. And once you do that, and you exist in their environment with them, it's not about a place or a destination or how we fit in. We become so integral to part of the community that they look to us when there are strifes in the community, when there are those things that cause transition, when there are changes in our political system. Those things happen, and we've seen that happen because you are actively a part of community. And that's a transition that we need to talk about in thinking. That our Salvation Army Corps are not to be bases in which we hone down and we just sit in. We have to be engaged. If you are not a part of community, you can't have impact on that community. And that's just a very important thing I think we need to recognize. As Bo has said, it's very fluid. It can't be territorial. It has to be communion. And so as I deal with navigating partnerships and people, understanding that in every partnership, someone wants something, they all have to have their needs met. And if we can do that, honestly, we can start to reach people that we thought were unreachable. The same unattainable people we thought, because they have different viewpoints. And so what I say is that don't judge us. Let's get together. Let's talk about it. Let's honestly have a conversation. What are your concerns? And if we do that, because particularly when we talk about transition, the effects that go in between relationships and then navigating people is a very concrete thing that we need to understand.
You know, we have maybe about 10 minutes left, so I want to shift gears a little bit back to a personal level. What are some of the skills, knowledge, character traits that a local leader needs in order to navigate change? How can we empower people to be able to navigate the changes that we know are coming, that are a part of it? We've talked a bit already about some, healthy sort of attitudes towards change, some different ways of thinking about change. Maybe if I could get each of you to say something about, from the personal perspective, how can someone who's leading at any level, a soldier, an adherent, a member of a core or church, how can anyone be ready, for that change to come, as it certainly will?
I'll go first.
Sure.
So last year I got to be a seminary professor, and it was a great joy. And the two things that I found were most helpful to my seminary students, young women and men training for ministry, were these two quick things. That they really loved an analogy. Jesus used plant analogies. So if we are rooted in a tradition, we have the frameworks of our denomination or our institution, but that the leaves that interact with our culture, right? That's the change part, bringing an expression of fruit or flower, that a living example, right, that changes with the seasons, helped them so much in their personal character and integrity to say, I'm rooted in this place. I'm part of a bigger structure that interacts with its environment. But what do I want to be the fruit or the flower? That was the most helpful analogy. The second thing I just want to mention is there's a book called Unwinding the Clock. She's a female physicist from Sweden. And so she has a very un-North American approach to time. She has an analogy in there that says balance is static, that we're jugglers. And when we have the routine, but sometimes really heavy things get introduced to the rotation, and sometimes really dangerous things get introduced to the rotation. So like a bowling ball or a flaming axe, let's say. So you're juggling these three things, and then a dangerous thing and a heavy thing get introduced. You have to change the pace of your rotation in order to deal with the heavy thing well, like a temptation or a crisis, and a dangerous thing. Because if you try and keep up that regular rotation that you're accustomed to or that you feel like has been imposed on you, you cannot, as a leader, deal well with something heavy or dangerous.
Good, helpful. Two for one. Those two metaphors for one. Thanks. The juggling and then the living tree. So, someone else want to speak to how do individuals in a healthy way approach change, or how can they?
I would say just learning that the simple fact that change is constant. Heraclitus said this many years ago as a philosopher: change is the only constant. It will come. And so if you are not able to embrace change, then that's really looking at you and saying that you have to adapt some way in yourself. Nothing's going to stay the same. And so we have to acknowledge and recognize that change is going to come. And it will come in circumstances whether we want them to or not. And particularly as I look at families in the church, just the familiar dynamic. Change happens through marriage, through birth, through death, through divorce. Change happens, and sometimes it is thrust upon us, and it takes us a time to adapt. But if we recognize that that change is constant, I think we'll be in a better place.
Yeah, and good. And not all change is negative. I mean, you mentioned births. And
yes,
that you're accustomed to, or that you feel like.
I would say also, just piggybacking on that, is preparation. And knowing that change is a constant, yes, but you have to instill within the people that are around you that we have to be prepared for whenever it happens. You know, people die all the time, and sometimes you're not prepared for that death to happen. But you know that it can happen at any time, and yet we're still not prepared for it. So we need to prepare our people for change, to have the mindset that it's going to come, it's going to happen, and we need to be able to move on. What is our plan? We need to have a plan A, plan B, and plan C for moving on when this change happens. And if we're in that mindset where we're prepared for it, then the transition is going to be so much smoother.
Thanks.
Yeah.
My director has a quote on her: "Life is all about plan B," because it's never what you thought it was going to be, your initial plan. And I think totally your mindset makes a difference. So coming at it with a positive outlook and embracing it, as Bo has talked about, embracing the change instead of trying to push back on the change is important, and approaching it in a positive manner. It's not easy, and it's hard to be joyful when it's the tough times, but that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, if I was going to pray for any one gift as a leader, I'd pray for two.
Only two?
Yeah, I'd pray for two above all. I think the one I pray for often is discernment.
Yes. Yes.
What does this mean in the scope of things for the kingdom? You know, not me, but overall, what's it mean for my family, my church, and I think I'd pray for the gift of discernment and I think there are several books that can help people through that. And we do a lot of teaching about leading, but we do very little teaching in the church about discernment.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the Spirit actually saying through this change to us? You know, how can we join His work that's already going on? You know, so that would be first. And then the second, I think I would pray for humility. And humility in that I've got to be able to see the other's position and not be so entrenched in what I'm doing, because if I'm not humble before, in my case, the officers in my division, and not vulnerable and transparent in that humility, you know, then I'm not who I should be. You know, my grandma used to say all the time when I got hooked into this organization, if you have to tell people you're in charge, you're not. and so you know, how can I be humble but yet help navigate? Thank you, Chris. What a great word. Navigate people through these changes, and we can't do it without discernment of what the Spirit is already doing. And so if you're a local leader in your core, pray that you know what the Spirit really wants for and you know what, if people start praying for that, there's going to be an agreement in the congregation.
Yes.
Maybe not how we get there exactly, but we know this is where we got to get. And then the rest of it sort of falls in line as you begin to navigate that. At least that's been my experience in a lot of places. Because, you know, I've been at this for 412 years. And so I knew Chrissy when she was little. So, but you know, so that, you know, I think more than anything, we don't need rah-rah people every time that, you know, let's go forward and do this. No, let's discern what the Spirit has to say to us. And when we get it right in community and get it right together, I think He'll lead us where we need to go.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And discernment, humility. Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate everything that everyone has offered. You've each brought a great deal of value to this conversation. And of course, more could be said. There are so many directions that this conversation could have taken. We began with sort of what's going to happen to our core when an officer changes, and really realize that the place that we really need to be is thinking about, like Major Glasgow was saying, not what's happening in your building, but the broader community, Christ incarnate in the world today through us, and so forth. So I appreciate and want to thank everyone who's been here. To those who are listening in now, I want to let you know that there's going to be more of these conversations in May. We're going to be having a conversation on what is quality worship, how to make more quality worship at your core, and the meaning of worship. So we're going to have Lisa Collier, who's done a master's degree in worship, Brittany Parks, Charles Roberts, Andrew Boynton, some others who are going to be speaking into that topic. And we're going to be talking about vocation in June. We'll have a lead preview in July and so forth. So please join us again. If you're listening through Stitcher or through an iTunes iPod, I want to encourage you to like the show or rate it. If you don't like it, go ahead, rate it. Share it if you found it valuable. Subscribe, and just know also that at saconnects.org you can find On Point webinars archived, and you will also find small group discussion guides so that you can take the discussion further in your own context in a way that's relevant for your own community. And so please check us out on all of those venues. Thanks once again. And this is Isaiah Allen signing off.